Hi everyone, it's Melissa, and today I am going to do a little quarterly check-in and talk about my goals and how I did or didn't meet them during the first quarter of the year, and some of my favorite and least favorite books that I read during the first 3 months of 2021. So I'm going to try to put in a little table that I've been using to keep track of my goals and whether or not I'm meeting them. So my main goals for the year were to reread about a book a month was the goal. So it doesn't necessarily have to be every month, but by the end of the year I wanted to reread 12 books. So to reread one book a month, to read a graphic novel every month, to read a nonfiction book every month, and to read a poetry book, or a collection of poetry rather, every month. So those are the things I wanted to make sure I was including, because sometimes I like all of those things, and sometimes I forget to include those in TBRs if I'm not actively thinking about them. So that's why I put those on my goals for the year. And then I also wanted, because I have so many unread books on my shelves and also like digitally as like ebooks or audiobooks, I had a goal to read every month 25% of my reading to be from my shelves, either digitally or physically. I wanted half of the books I read every month to be from my Goodreads TBR, because it is getting out of control. And even though I've been culling it periodically, like I'll go through and delete things I'm no longer interested in, it's still like bigger than I would like it to be. So I wanted to read a lot from my Goodreads TBR in order to bring that down. I wanted to read about 50% of my books from Black, Indigenous, or people of color authors, and I wanted at least 50% of my reading to be from Canadian authors or like international authors, i.e. not from American or UK publishers, just because last year I found that overwhelmingly I was reading books from the UK and from the US, and I would like to read from my own country of Canada and also from other countries as well. So those were my goals, and here's how I did. So for rereading, it doesn't look very good. Like I only reread one book during the first quarter, but that book was Lord of the Rings, which is very long, and technically I could count these as individual books, like Fellowship, Two Towers, and Return of the King, but I just counted as one book. So I don't really feel bad about only rereading one book, because it's a very long book, and I read it from like December through to March as an audiobook. So even though I only read like 1 out of 3 rereads, I'm quite happy with that actually. That doesn't bother me. I read 2 graphic novels out of 3 months, which I think that's actually fine. I'm sure there will be some months where I read like multiple graphic novels, and I'm sure I'll like more than make up for that, so I'm not really concerned about that. I only read 1 nonfiction book, which really surprised me, because I didn't think I'd have to actively really work at that goal, because I do enjoy nonfiction, but I think at the beginning of the year I was just feeling really like low, because of like I get like seasonally depressed when there's like not a lot of daylight. I think my reading was just kind of like slowed down, and I feel like I just gravitated toward fiction. So I'll just try to read a little bit more nonfiction throughout the rest of the year. I did read 1 poetry collection every month for the first quarter. I'm very happy about that, because poetry is something that I want to get back into. I used to read it a lot in like high school and in university, and then I just stopped. So I'm very pleased about that. I also have been reading, I read 34% of my books from my shelves. So I'm very, very happy about that. The next goal I'm not so happy that I didn't reach, because I do get overwhelmed when TBRs, like my Goodreads TBR, or just like lists that I keep, when they get unruly, they get really long, it kind of overwhelms me. I'm not one of those people who likes to have piles of unread books, either physically or just imaginary lists of things that I want to read, right? Like not imaginary, but non-tangible things. So I read about a third from my Goodreads TBR, which I think is still pretty good. I think that's better. I didn't exactly keep track of this last year, but I think that's a lot better than my reading last year. But I still would like to get it closer to 50%. And how I might end up doing that is I am very much a TBR person. I love making TBRs and I stick to them. I'm not much of a mood reader, really. And I just like making lists and I like planning. But I think sometimes I get caught up in like the planning around certain things, like planning my reading around like a readathon or around a particular month, like International Women's Day or for Black History Month, or like those types of things where I'm looking for specific books, which actually is helpful because it, it reminds me to, read certain things. But it also means that if I don't have anything on my Goodreads TBR that, fits certain prompts or themes or whatever, I will go search out new things that aren't on my TBR already, and will read those instead, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's nice to discover new books. However, I do think the reason that I don't really read from my existing TBR a lot is because I plan things around readathons and I plan things around certain prompts. I find that a lot of fun, but I would like to get my Goodreads TBR down a little bit. So I might do an experiment and try mood reading. It's not something I really do. I always plan my reading. Even before I was on BookTube, I would plan like what I wanted to read. So I think I might experiment with that a little bit and just try a month or maybe even just like a couple weeks where I don't have a set plan and I just go to my Goodreads TBR, scroll through it, and see if there's any books that kind of jump out at me like, yeah, I really want to read that right now. So that might be a little experiment that I do. So the next goal I had was to read 50% Black, Indigenous, and people of color authors. And I did do this. I read 56%. I think a lot of that had to do with Black History Month, of course. I was prioritizing Black authors in February. And also I have been reading a few books for the Invisible Cities challenge, which is to read different works in translation from different countries as set out by the hosts. And I haven't been doing all of the countries, but I think that has also helped me to read at least 50% BIPOC authors. So I'm happy about that. Some people might wonder about that as a goal and think it's kind of like weird, but I do want to read from like as many different like people different to me as possible. I don't want to just read like white cis women. Like I want to read from a lot of different people. And I wish I could just not think about it, but last year I kind of like audited my reading and I was surprised at how overwhelmingly white my reading list was. And so for me right now, I do have to like pay attention. It's not meant to be like a tick box of like, oh, I read like from an Asian author, I read from a Black author, like that kind of thing. But if it's not like actively on my radar, I worry that I will like forget to choose books. I think the books that are kind of like pushed and promoted a lot are white books. I think it's starting to get a little bit better. Like I'm seeing more diversity promoted, and I don't know if that's the publishing industry changing or maybe I'm just subscribed to like booktubers who are recommending and talking about books like that. So maybe it's the media that I'm choosing to consume. So it is getting easier, but I don't feel like I'm quite there yet where I can't have it on like a goals list. Maybe my next year I'll be able to take it off and focus on something else, because I do realize there are other gaps in my reading, like reading books by disabled authors or books by members of the LGBTQIA plus community. But I didn't want to get overwhelmed with too many goals. So this year I'm focusing really on authors who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color, and I might like add some other goals next year as well. I'm rambling a little bit, so let's go on to the last goal, which was to read 50% international or Canadian. So last year, I realized that I was reading a lot from the UK and the US, and that's just because the UK and the US publish a lot of books. But I want to read from my own country of Canada, and I want to read from other places as well, other countries. This goal I failed miserably at. I wanted to read 50% and I read 19%. So that's one out of all of these. Like, I feel like the ones that I didn't hit was still okay. Like, even though I didn't hit 50% for my Goodreads TBR, I read a third, and that's like still fine, right? And like reading nonfiction or graphic novels, like those were personal goals, but they don't really matter as much to me as like reading from outside of the UK and the US. So I think out of all of these goals, that's the one I'm going to focus on the strongest for the upcoming quarter. So that's a recap of my goals. I did want to mention my favorite and least favorite books that I read up until now. So looking through the things that I read, I think I've had a really, really good first quarter. Most of the books I either really liked or loved. Some of them I was just kind of like, that was fine, but it wasn't really for me. There was really only one book I actively disliked, and that was Tender as the Flesh by Agustina Bastrica. I have a whole video explaining why I didn't like that book. But everything else I either thought was okay or I really enjoyed. So the tops for the first quarter, definitely Lord of the Rings. It's a reread. It's one of my favorites of all time. Like, that's kind of a given for me. It's just a very warm and comforting place for me. So other than the Lord of the Rings, I think I have 3 other tops that I want to mention. So the first one being Life on Mars by Tracy K. Smith. This is a poetry collection. I just really liked the imagery, and I really liked how her words flowed together. And I don't think it was like a perfect poetry collection, but for whatever reason, the poems just kind of like washed over me in a very satisfying way. I just really enjoyed it. And The New Kid by Jerry Craft, I also highly enjoyed. It's a middle grade graphic novel about a new kid who's one of very few people of color, like kids of color, at his school. And I just really like the characters. I like the dynamics between characters. I liked the illustration style. And I like the story. And I don't know. It was cute when it needed to be cute. It was funny when it needed to be funny. And it was serious when it needed to be serious. I just really liked it. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is a classic, Moby Dick by Herman Melville. I don't think this will necessarily be like my top of the year or anything, but I think like looking at the things I read in the first quarter, it definitely does stick out as one of the things that I read, just that I keep going back to and keep thinking about and keep dissecting like several weeks after finishing the book, you know? And I think that says something. I did highly enjoy it while I was reading it, but it's also one that just keeps popping up. It's something that I will definitely reread in the future, because I think there's still a lot more to it that I haven't discovered, and I think it's something that the more I read it, the more layers I'll peel back, you know? So I think those are my tops for the first quarter. So that is a review of my first 3 months of reading in 2021. Let me know what your like top and bottom books for the first quarter are in the comments below. And thanks everyone for watching, and we'll chat soon. Take care.